So dudes, Tubarão in some ways has more potent vertical playing ability than Pulse. And in this video, I'll show you how to take advantage of that and some use case scenarios for his gadget. In combination of some good weapons and a versatile gadget, he's going to be a hugely dynamic operator with a ton of outplay potential. In particular, I like his ability to slow down the movement of the TDM meta, to dial down the temperature, if you will. Now, I don't know if you guys don't like the cold, but personally, I'm a cold sleeper, and I can't sleep when it's too hot. Fortunately, Tubarão and Manta Sleep have you covered on that front. Do you sleep much? Of course you don't. You play Siege. I don't sleep much because... But hopefully the sponsor of this video, Manta Sleep, will help me and help you. Manta Sleep consider themselves advocates of the pro nap movement, which sounds really awesome, and I would also like to be an advocate for. Manta makes high-quality sleep masks of all kinds. This one I have in my hands is made of silk in particular. They all have this particular C shape that cups your eyes, and I have a studio light on right now. I'm going to crank this thing all the way up on both settings here. And as you can tell, I get easily sunburned. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. It completely blocks it. Really high quality. I've used the basic kind of cheap sleep masks you can get off of Amazon before, but this, you can definitely tell if you used them before, there is a distinct difference in the comfort quality compared to this. I would like to thank Manta Sleep for having me join the pro nap movement. I might participate in the pro nap movement before some riveting games of Rainbow Six Siege. The operator is EP and has had a long day of protecting the hostage. Check out Manta Sleep at the link in the description. Use my code GGE for 10% off of what you get. Thanks to Manta Sleep for sponsoring. Tubarão is a crowd-controlling character. This means that a lot of his gameplay loop pretty much revolves around wasting time. However, there is an interesting caveat to this type of crowd-controlling character versus somebody like Melusi. So Melusi is something that we would think of as crowd-controlling on defense, but the difference between this guy and Melusi is that Melusi's gadget is usually going to get shot as soon as it gets activated, right? You usually play Melusi and you have to act on the information really quickly. So she might put a wub here, somebody tries to peek the doorway, you go for the pick before they can shoot the wub out. So as you can see here, this thing is going to remain active until somebody shoots it. So that's one example of it being used for crowd controlling. Direct crowd controlling in the sense that people will try to walk through and then get slowed, that's not going to be as effective, right? Because they can just bip and then just keep going. So what you want to use this thing for, not so much in terms of, movement crowd controlling. What you want to do with this gadget is waste time. You want to use it to slow down attacker gadgets like thermites charges. This thing will work on any type of gadget, right? It'll work on any kind of mechanical or electronic gadget. The logic therein being electronics stop working when they reach a certain kind of cold temperature. So that applies to stuff like breaching charges, thermite charges, etc., etc. It's also going to work against your C4. So something that I think a lot of people are going to see here is the gadget works through floors, right? And you'd be forgiven for thinking this isn't a bad idea. You throw this gadget through the floor, they can't shoot it through the floor. That gives it a lot more, it makes it safer, it allows the gadget to work, and then they'll try to throw a C4 on it. Well, you can't, right? Not until the gadget stops working. But what is important to note about this gadget is that it shows footsteps of people who walk on top of the ice. As you can see here. And if I hop down here, I'm pretty sure I can see them too, so you can see what I'm talking about. Yeah, there you go. You saw it really briefly. So the goal is not to use it like Pulse. You can't really use Tubarão like Pulse, right? If you try to throw the gadget, the radius on this thing is pretty big. I mean, even at the edge of the radius with the C4, it still freezes, right? And it's just kind of licking the edge of that there. So nobody's going to walk through it all the way across and then get blown up by C4. What you're going to do is just floor bang them. That's kind of the idea. And it's a little bit different than you might expect. I think there's a reason that this guy does not have a shotgun. But there's going to be some characters like Pulse, Valk, who are really good at playing below the shotgun that are going to like this gadget a lot. Because if they're caught in the ice field, they're just, it's fish in a barrel, right? So the C4 comboing, that's not really going to be a thing as much with Tubarão. Let's talk about another use case scenario for Tubarão's gadget. So we have some brick flooring and we have some wood panel flooring here. This is a typical kind of setup that you would see for Villa. You might have frost mats here. You might have fenriers, thorns, stuff like that. At least that's what I like to bring for this particular site. And it's a pain in the butt, right? Because you can get swung from a number of different angles. And if there's a ton of crowd controlling gadgetry going through here, it's going to be really, really tough to take these gunfights. So something that attackers will do to get around this is they'll bring a twitch, they'll bring an IQ, and then they might be able to clear some of the utility along here. Maybe they'll get rid of some barbed wire. Maybe there's a deployable shield there and they have a Gon 6 for the deployable shield. But the thing that I think is really interesting about Tubarão is, unlike Melusi, who can be seen ahead of time, and then you can kind of formulate a plan based off of what you see with an IQ, because the gadget placement is static, it's set at the beginning of a round. Tubarão is reactionary. So attackers are often going to get caught more by surprise than not. A good example where I think Tubarão could get some leverage playing is with the deployable shield placement here for bricks, but I also think another great spot for him is just going to be below. Now, like I illustrated for you earlier, he's not going to be comboing up the C4 a whole lot, but there are going to be some interesting scenarios here where it's going to be difficult for the attackers to take the gunfights at the pacing that they want, and they don't really have any counter play, which is a really, really big difference here. If the gadget is thrown directly onto the opponent, say this example, somebody can jump in and then shoot it. But if you throw it through the floor below, right? I shot holes because I'm bad and I don't know where I am. But if you throw it through the floor below, completely different story, right? Now the attackers, you know, unless they have a buck or something and they like buck at their feet, they don't really have a way to get rid of it. So this is going to deny a really important timing regardless of what they do. And you have a bunch of these things, right? You have 4 of these canisters. So you could theoretically just play below and you can waste a pretty significant amount of time. I actually think it's a good idea to actually gauge how much time you can waste if you space these gadgets out 4 times in a row. So let's look up at the clock. I'll throw it now. Okay, so about 10 seconds or so. I guess between 10 and 11 seconds. So 10 times 4, that's 40 seconds that you can potentially waste on one choke point if you just sit here and you toss these things up. Obviously, pretend it's, you know, not a C4 for my example. That's not irrelevant, and I think any smart attacking team is going to try to get rid of you and try to clear you out, much like a Pulse or anybody else. This is going to be a serious pain in the butt, especially on chokeholds like this. It's just going to be really difficult for the attackers to take gunfights. They can't, you know, there's no peeker's advantage, and they can't sprint to a better position. So, Tubarão, I think this is going to be one of the more underrated aspects of his kit, and I can see him being used significantly in competitive environments for this reason. That's not to say there aren't situations where you can mitigate the peeker's advantage with this gadget and toss it right on top of them. But it's not going to happen, I think, at high elo levels, where people are going to be a lot more reactionary. They can flick to the gadget and then flick right back to you. In your lobbies, and honestly in my lobbies too, let's be real, you can probably get away with it.
Photo canister in place.
Another powerful aspect of Tubarão's kit is the fact that he can throw this gadget. So like we covered earlier with Melusi, who's going to play in a much more static way, a set and forget kind of way, where you're sort of expected to play off of the gadget's positioning in the back of your mind at all times. Tubarão is more reactionary in a similar way to how Azami is like a more reactionary, reflexive sort of version of an operator like Castle in certain respects. I know it's not a direct one-to-one, but for the purposes of this example, it works. So something that Ubisoft highlighted in their coverage of Tubarão is that Tubarão can be used either as a flex or an anchor. Now, this gadget is so powerful that I think he's probably going to get used more like an anchor. I could be wrong, but from what I'm looking at right now, 40 seconds total of movement denial is pretty freaking good. Now, the instances where I think he's going to play a little bit more like a roamer, maybe something like a lurker hybrid, somewhere in between. Not like a, you know, all the way on the other end of the map kind of roamer, like a deep roamer like Vigil. An example of where he's going to get that leverage is a map like Cafe, where there's going to be balcony play and height at which he can fight at. So this is kind of an anchory position, right? There's pillars that he can sit on and play off of. He can deny heaven window. He can even fight snow if he has to. He can fight the hatch drops, and he can fight the push from the hatch. But I wouldn't call this exactly a anchor position, right? It's kind of a roam position. It's not on the floor where the bomb sites are, but you're still kind of playing somewhere in between roamer and anchor with this setup. What's going to be really powerful here is the fact that he can throw the gadget super far. Remember that this thing works through a lot of surfaces. So if you get good with the lineups here, I'm going to try to hit the like the edge of the pillar here and see if I can get through the floorboards. All right, so that's a little bit low. But I think you can still see that. Yeah, you can still see the ice kind of coating the floor. Now, I notice there is map geometry here on this chandelier. I'm going to see if I can't hit it. And I can do this without having to worry about somebody pushing out of the cigar door further ahead. Okay, so I missed there. So probably practice this in a custom game first. And there you go. Look, it hits the geometry. It hits the chandelier, and then it'll affect the floor below. Maybe we can get it a little bit higher to cover more ground. Nice. Perfect. So I just safely covered, like, what's essentially the cigar walkout from all the way over here through verticality safely. That's pretty good. Now, if I'm playing on the top floor, if I'm playing a typical anchor position, see how this is a little bit more dangerous. And let's not forget that if you can see and shoot the gadget, it stops working. It's not like smoke where you can throw this thing and then detonate it right away, and then you're chilling, right? You get that area denial. If they shoot it, it's useless. So there's nothing particularly wrong if the context is permitting for you to use the gadget on the top floor like this, and then, you know, this is powerful. Don't get me wrong. But if you have the ability to play like this, this is really good too. And remember, 10 to 11 seconds, you know, about what I guessed. So 40 seconds total out of all the gadgetry that you have. Not to mention, Tubarão has a really good gun with the 1.5. I think that the effects of the gun are mitigated by the fact that it has a 10-round mag. I know a lot of people are irritated that Aruni has a DMR, for instance. I think on tube, it's fine. This is one of the, you know, quote-unquote weaker DMRs. It's not exactly a bad gun, but it does have a tiny mag, and it has comparable damage to the Mark 14. So it's objectively worse than the Mark 14. There's a reason that they gave this to him instead of the Mark 14. His gadget kind of makes up for it. But he also has C4. That shouldn't be removed from the equation, per se. So even if you want to ignore all that and just, you know, whatever, like, play it for the spawn peak, play it for the DMR. What the heck? I mean, you can do that. There's nothing stopping you. Especially on this map, for crying out loud. But yeah, Tubarão's a very flexible character, and I think he's going to get a ton of play in competitive and a lot of different use case scenarios. I'm curious to see what happens when he arrives in the Pro League games. If this video raised your Siege IQ, be sure to give it a like, share it with your friends, guys. It really does help me out a lot and supports the business. I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, take care. Deuces.